What is a fun fact that is mildly disturbing? Story 1. Octopuses have what is called decentralized intelligence, which essentially means that their limbs have their own intelligence. For example, if a severed human limb touches acid or fire or anything that would cause pain, nothing would happen. However, if an octopus limb touches acid or fire, it would recoil and avoid it, even though it's been severed and is no longer attached to the octopus. Story 2. There's a condition out there that when tissue gets damaged, the body replaces the damaged tissue with bone instead of regenerating the organ. As the person ages, they become slowly encased in a prison of bone until they cannot move anymore. The organs inside them turn hard, and eventually they die at the age of 11. The longest reported life of someone who had this condition lived to 13. Story 3. Owl wing feathers are unique in having comb-like leading front edges that change the way air moves over the surface and allow for incredibly silent flight. This is why owls are able to fly right at you or prey without the telltale whoosh noise that you would hear if something like a hawk did the same. Story 4. There was something in the 1960s called Project Acoustic Kitty, where basically the CIA wanted to put microphones and transmitters inside of cats and used them to spy on the Soviets. It cost about $20 million and was a huge failure, with the first cat supposedly getting hit by a car and killed immediately after being released. Even though it failed, the thought of my own pet being used by the government to spy on me is pretty unsettling. Story 5. Penguins can be gay. Most people can't tell the difference between a male penguin and a female penguin. Sometimes neither can the penguins, and they usually mate for life. If it happens in zoos, the keepers wait for any other mating pair to produce 2 eggs, remove an egg, and give it to the gay couple to raise. Apparently it can be really sweet but heartbreaking because all the other pairs are producing eggs and the gay couple aren't. So they find a stone that looks like an egg, assume it's theirs, adopt it, and brood it. Then when all the other eggs are hatching, you have this confused gay couple who can't understand why a baby chick is not emerging from this rock. So yeah, they are given a spare egg and get to raise a chick that turns out just like every other chick. Story 6. Plants evolved to be spicy so that animals wouldn't eat them. Only humans like spices. Imagine the plant. You finally evolve and have incredible strength, but then you realize that strength is also your weakness. Close. They evolved it so that mammals specifically wouldn't eat them. Birds don't have the receptors that capsaicin interacts with. It's beneficial for the fruit to be eaten by birds instead of mammals because birds will spread the seeds much further in their poo than a mammal would. Story 7. It takes a single blood cell in your body about a minute to travel completely through your bloodstream. That is why IV medications work as fast as they do, and the paralyzing agents I gave my patient last night to help him breathe on the ventilator worked in about 10 seconds. Yep, been knocked out many times for surgery through an IV. The coolest ones are the automated ones where you get to see it actually push the drugs into your system. Don't know why it fascinates me so much. Also, in the 10 or so surgeries I've ever had, nobody has ever told me to count back from 10. It's just always take some nice deep breaths into the oxygen mask, followed by everything going spinny for about 5 to 15 seconds, and then you wake up 1.5 seconds later in the recovery room. Pretty sure the spinning is from opioids because is it fun? I don't do opioids, probably a good thing. Story 8. In the 1700s, a French peasant woman gave birth to a deformed boy named Tarrare. Tarrare is the hungriest man in history. In his teens, he could eat a quarter of a cow. His family sent him away because of his voracious appetite. He then ran around the French countryside eating garbage and small animals. People saw this and used him as a street-side attraction. Once he got an intestinal blockage, but the crowd was kind enough to carry him to the hospital, where he was treated with the strongest laxatives at the time. After this began the War of the First Coalition. Tarrare signed up for the army. Even after being granted quadruple rations, he still resorted to garbage grabbing. The officers saw his condition and sent him to a military hospital. The hospital saw his weird traits and decided to put them to the test. Tarrare ate a meal meant for 14 people in one go. A general visited Tarrare after learning of his talents. He said that if Tarrare ate a wooden box with a message inside it, then he would be rewarded with a wheelbarrow full of bull organs. He did, and the box emerged a day later. Tarrare was used as a spy and was sent to Prussia. The only problem was he couldn't be very discreet running around mutilating animals. Tarrare also couldn't speak German. He was captured and chained to a toilet until the box passed through his body. It wasn't anything important, so they mock executed him, beat him, and sent him back to France. He went back to the hospital desperate for a cure. Nothing worked, and his hunger got so bad he went to the morgue and ate multiple cadavers. One day he went too far and ate a 14-month-old baby. He was kicked out of the hospital. He returned years later and died of tuberculosis. Edit: I forgot to mention the part where, while in the hospital, Tarrare ate other patients' poultice. He also drank the blood of patients undergoing bloodletting. One of the hospital tests was to give him an eel. Tarrare crushed the eel's skull between his teeth and ate it. This was disturbing because at some point in digestion, only the bones were left. He had thousands of tiny needle-like ribs sticking to his guts, and he was fine. Story 9. A very large portion of the cryptography that secures stuff on the internet is based on a foundation of math that we don't really understand that well. Depending on the answers to math questions that nobody on the planet knows the answer to, it might not really be protecting our data from snooping. Specifically, RSA is an algorithm that is very widely used in cryptography. I'm not a mathematician, but I believe the way it works is it relies on the idea that if I generate two really big prime numbers and then multiply them together and let you see the result, it's super hard for you to figure out what two prime numbers I started with. If you can defeat the encryption I'm using, but nobody knows for sure whether it's actually hard to do this. We don't know of a way to go backward, factor the product of two primes, in a reasonable time frame, and most people think it can't be done. But nobody has managed to prove mathematically that it can't. Story 10. Cats can usually survive a fall of any height. This is due to them having a large surface area compared to their mass. They also instinctively spread out their limbs to slow their fall further. Falls from 30 centimeters or less are actually more dangerous due to them not having enough time to orient their bodies to land safely. Story 11. Eating enough pineapple, and I mean a lot like several whole fruits worth, will result in your tongue dissolving. The enzymes in the pineapple break down the tissue in your tongue. This is why you get a little tingling sensation when you eat pineapples. Story 12. Your eyes do not move smoothly. Because of this, there are pieces of your vision that go missing when you move your eyes, as they turn off between jittery movements. So your life isn't a full strobe light-filled existence. Your brain creates what you should be seeing in between moving your eyes. It also anticipated what you could be looking at and filled in the blanks. In order to fill in the blanks, your brain has to anticipate and show you the future, then let your eyes adjust to the present. So you get a little bit of time dilation every time you move your eyes. You can see this mostly when looking at a clock. When you look at a clock, sometimes that last second will hang before turning over, or you may see the second hand tick backward before going back to normal. It's a cool, neat little fun fact, but your brain is crafting a whole reality for you just so you don't have to deal with a strobe effect, and that's a little disturbing. Story 13. That our skeletons are capable of sweating a substance that can create panic attacks for the bearing person. Male ducks have corkscrew-shaped penises that are super long and covered in sharp, prickly barbs. Butterflies will drink your blood if given the chance. Dolphins swim in trees because they are three males looking to pin a female to the ocean floor and gang rape it. Story 14. I read the book Freakonomics, and there was a chapter talking about the reduction in the crime rate in the 1990s, I believe it was, and it talked about all the factors that contributed to it, and the biggest factor was actually the legalization of abortion, because the biggest contributor to crime is poverty, and the highest amount of unwanted pregnancy is among low-income people. So basically there was an entire generation of young people who would have been born into poverty and would have been coming to the age when they would start committing crimes. But because of legalized abortion, there was a large number of these potential criminals that were never born. Needless to say, this was a controversial part of the book. Story 15. I don't know if this is mildly disturbing, but your childhood is about to be ruined. The Sleeping Beauty is originally in the first Italian tale, 1634, sleeping in an abandoned palace, not to be awoken until a king, whom she never met before, low-key goes to the palace and sees her sleeping. Apparently he has a weird fetish for sleeping women, 'cause he didn't kiss her. Oh no, dear, he raped her. And if that's not disturbing enough, he impregnated her, with not one but two TWO twins. He then leaves. The evil queen? She was the wife of the king, and the Sleeping Beauty gives birth while asleep. Go off, sis. and two fairies appear to nurse her children, so they make her Sleeping Beauty's fingers, so she awakens and blah blah. The king comes and takes her. The queen finds out her husband is a cheating rapist. She attempts to make the king eat the twins and almost burns the Sleeping Beauty. IDC, if it's long, my childhood was ruined and so shall yours. Story 16. From medieval times to the end of the Victorian era, princes had whipping boys who were educated alongside the prince and would receive any corporeal punishment the royal would have received, as the princes outranked their teachers and could not be touched by anyone but their parents, who were the king and queen. Story 17. It's estimated that roughly 1/4 of the world's population is currently infected with tuberculosis. You might be thinking, surely not? Well, the reason why it isn't more obvious is that there is such a thing as being infected with latent TB, where your body has it under control and the disease is asleep. The disease could become active tomorrow, a couple of years from now, or you could take it to the grave. There are treatments for it, of course, so it's not all doom and gloom, but it happens often enough that still over 1 million people every year die from it. Edit bonus points if you are from South Africa as well, as it is estimated roughly 80% of the country is infected at this time. Story 18. An octopus is capable of complex problem solving and communication. Now consider that octopuses are largely solitary animals whose mothers die soon after they hatch. What this means is every solution to every problem an octopus solves could be considered an entirely novel thought. They weren't taught and likely aren't mimicking, they just figure out complex solutions entirely on their own. Story 19. As you fall into a black hole, your relative time slows down as you drop further into the gravity well. This means that the time for the rest of the universe relatively speeds up. Black holes are exercises in absolute extremes, so time would basically speed up to infinity as you hit the event horizon. In short, if you ever fell into a black hole and looked back out as you fell, you would watch the universe literally die with you. Story 20. In archaeology, there are some burials we call deviant or atypical burials that refer to burials that are different from the normative burial ritual of the respective period, region, or cemetery. Usually, a skeleton might be found laid out in a prone position, laying on their stomach, so with their backs facing heaven, or secluded from the rest of the cemetery as they could be seen as criminals, handicapped, or even believed to be vampires, witches. Some would have their tongue cut out and replaced with a flat stone so the evil spirits wouldn't come out to haunt people or to stop their souls from leaving their mouths and ascending to heaven, or have a stake in their heart, abdomen, or hands, or have rocks on their chest. Story 21. Everything you've ever remembered, you've only ever remembered the actual event once. Because of the weird way our brains work, a memory is deleted once it is recalled because it is replaced with a new memory, the memory of recalling the original memory. So when you remember that time you went for a pony ride during your friend's 8th birthday, you're actually remembering the last time you remembered going for a pony ride during your friend's 8th birthday. Story 22. Stubbins Firth was a doctor in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He studied yellow fever and wanted to prove his theory that yellow fever was not contagious, so when no one would volunteer, he took matters into his own hands. He first made an incision in his arm and smeared vomit from a patient with yellow fever into it. This, however, was not enough proof, so he took more vomit and rubbed it in his eyes. Sadly, still not enough evidence, so he baked some puke from a patient, put it in a bowl, and then proceeded to inhale the fumes of the vomit and eventually eat it. He eventually moved on to injecting their blood into himself, drinking their urine and saliva. He, however, went nowhere near poop, thank God. He, however, never got yellow fever and published a paper. His theory is, however, disproven, and yellow fever is highly contagious. He was, however, lucky as his patients had been suffering from it so long that the and bodily fluids he acquired at that point made the virus not contagious anymore. Story 23. Also known as the buzzer, UVB-76 is a shortwave radio station believed to be of Russian origin that has been broadcasting the same mysterious signal, a low, monotonous buzz punctuated by occasional Russian voice transmission since 1982. No one knows where it comes from. Story 24. Not so much a fun fact, but quite disturbing and upsetting if I do say so. JFK's sister Rosemary was lobotomized in 1941 as she was mentally slow but otherwise a bright and happy individual. She was 23 at the time of her lobotomy. Obviously it all failed and her IQ dropped. After the surgery she was wheelchair-bound and barely responsive. Embarrassed by what had happened, the Kennedys sent her away to a mental asylum. The tragic part is she had her lobotomy in 1941 at the age of 23. Rosemary lived to be 86 years old, dying in 2006, and seeing two of her brothers assassinated. Story 25. A hospital is a building that you left but never entered. Your future self is watching you right now through memories. What if April Fool's Day was actually on the 2nd and we have all been fooled? People say that life is short, but it's the longest thing we will ever experience. You will be the last person to die in your lifetime. You not afraid of being home alone. You afraid of being home and being not alone. You will never know what you have forgotten, and that is all. Story 26. The crucifixion story in the Christian Bible explains why we no longer need an animal sacrifice for God to forgive us of our sins. In the Old Testament, a sinner would have to sacrifice an animal and sometimes a child to find favor with God. The God that all Christians, Jews, and Muslims pray to once required animal sacrifice. Jesus dying on the cross was considered a super sacrifice and was such a big deal that it was good enough for all people going forward. But God didn't just say, hey, this whole sacrifice thing is kind of crazy, maybe we'll just end this. What he really said was, all these dead animals are making a mess, so maybe we'll just kill my own kid and that will be penance enough for all of the sins you're going to commit in the future. So my fun fact is that we're exactly as advanced as some islanders tossing a virgin into the volcano. Story 27. Many cats contain a brain parasite that can infect humans and cause the infected person to develop a liking for cats, along with other much more harmful side effects. This allows the parasite to move on to more cats and continue its reproduction cycle. This may partly be the basis for the commonality of the crazy cat person. The parasite can also pass from human mother to unborn child or through breastfeeding, and may be the indirect cause of over 1 million deaths annually. Story 28. The reason for the biblical pork taboo we may not know for a fact, but there is a theory that people feared that their meat was too physically similar to that of a human. The ancients could well have considered eating pork akin to cannibalism. Doctors who treat burn victims have vouched for that theory, and so have anthropologists who studied cannibalistic tribes. I think it also has to do with the sounds that pigs make when they are being slaughtered. As a matter of fact, in parts of Scotland, their culture developed a pork taboo completely independently of the ancient Hebrews. Again, most anthropologists hypothesized that most likely it was for the exact same reasons. As for the commonly held theory that the pork ban was simply because of trichinosis fears, yes, it could be as simple as that. After all, none of us were there, so who are we to say for sure? But we should keep in mind that all food spoils and all undercooked meat is especially dangerous. But archaeologists have found pigs' bones among other peoples who lived around the old Hebrews, meaning that they didn't die from eating pork. So to me, the pork-tas cannibalism hypothesis seems rather plausible. Story 29. If a crime committed was severe enough, even if the perpetrator was dead, punishment was still handed down to the corpse. Look up the instance of John Williams in 1811, who was suspected of the murder of 2 separate families. They paraded his corpse around town on a wagon and had his body stand at attention in front of the houses of the families he had killed. An enraged citizen at one point even climbed on the wagon and forced the head of his corpse to face the victim's home. The coachman even supposedly whipped the corpse across the face 3 times. When the cart came opposite the late Mr. Marr's house, a halt was made for nearly a quarter of an hour. The procession then advanced to St. George's Turnpike, where the new road, now Commercial Road, is intersected by Cannon Street Road. Those who accompanied the procession arrived at a grave already dug 6 feet down. The remains of John Williams were tumbled out of the cart and lowered into this hole, and then someone hammered a stake through his heart. Story 30. Here's another to chip in. For most of recorded history and up until the age of exploration, people would eat food even after it expired or had maggots in it. Francesco Redi, a French scientist, is one of the reasons we don't eat maggots today. I mean, maggots are still eaten too. As an article puts it, yes, not only are maggots edible, they are a traditional superfood. They are also probably the most revolting insects one could imagine. Traditionally, many cultures have relished maggots, leaving fish or meat out to become saturated with them and then eating the maggots raw. Story 31. Banana-flavored candies taste nothing like bananas because their flavor mix is based on the Gros Michel banana, which went extinct in the 1970s. So banana candy is actually the ghost of what bananas used to taste like. Story 32. No one knows how anesthetics work. Anytime they put you under for a routine operation, there's currently no scientific explanation for why you're unconscious. The picture for your funeral program may have already been taken. Genghis Khan killed so many people in his wake that the farmlands they had used returned to being forest. He did this at such a scale that it actually significantly reduced carbon in the atmosphere, so let's be like Genghis Khan. Story 33. I find how little we know of history to be rather disturbing. So much happened in the ancient world with dynasties, kingdoms, politics, wars, etc., and yet we know so little about it. And when we find the rare written accounts of things that happened, it is also filtered not only by the lack of proper communication and relaying of information at the time, but also by the sheer intense bias of the author. Early Christians, for instance, had such contempt for the older established religions and belief systems that everything they wrote about them was fragmented from a lack of caring about the facts involved or intentionally misleading people with propaganda tactics. Now, it's hard to piece together information about what people actually believed or celebrated properly just because of all the rewrites and editing. Story 34. During the Vietnam War, soldiers passing through bodies of fresh water would drink the water because it was hot and they were thirsty. Shortly after doing so, they'd develop these large lumps in their nasal passages and throats. When they went to a doctor back on base, it turned out there were itty-bitty leech eggs floating in the water they drank. Those lumps were barf leeches growing inside their bodies. Story 35. The dendrocnide macrolides is a type of plant found in, go figure, Australia that has stinging hairs that deliver a potent neurotoxin under the skin. It is said that the pain from the neurotoxin, if untreated, can drive people mad and even to suicide. Ironically, the plant itself is edible if the hairs are removed.